The most powerful computer that we have at our disposal lies within our skull. And what's really powerful when it comes to neuroplasticity is that we're actually in control of how our brains evolve. When we take in less calories, we see increases in brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is the chemical that is most associated with neuroplasticity. This is the chemical that's most associated with our brains making new neurons and new connections. And we get to create the lives that we truly want for ourselves. We get to live the life that we want once we realize how to become the leaders that our brains need to be, once we realize that it's important to take charge of our brain every single day.
Hello and welcome back to the FitMind podcast. I'm your host Josh, and today we have an amazing episode with Dr. Philippe Douyon. Dr. Douyon is a board-certified neurologist and the founder of the Inler Brain Foundation. I honestly think this episode is the foundation for a healthy brain and a happy life. We cover what neuroplasticity is and common myths, some daily habits to prevent dementia and strokes, how sleep, diet, and social connection affects the brain, the impact of stress and multitasking, mental fitness exercises including and beyond meditation, whether brain-boosting supplements such as omega-3 or lion's mane really work, and the future of neuroscience and what excites him the most. Dr. Douyon shares really practical and science-backed ways where we can improve our cognitive health. So without further ado, I give you Dr. Philippe Douyon. Dr. Philippe, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the FitMind podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. So I'd love to start. You are a specialist in neurology. I'd love to start just hearing a little bit about your background and what it was that brought you into doing neurology and studying to be a doctor.
Sure. So growing up, I had a cousin who had epilepsy. She had childhood seizures and she eventually grew out of those. And then I had my grandmother who developed Alzheimer's when I was a teenager, and she had been the matriarch of our family. If you ever watch those TV shows or movies where everybody goes to grandma's house on Sundays for Sunday dinners, that was us on Saturday evenings. And when she started to have signs and symptoms of dementia, all of that went away. And between my cousin and my grandmother, even though those are two very devastating diseases to go through, but also to watch somebody go through, I remember thinking to myself, man, when the brain works the way that it's supposed to, it's an incredible organ. And that's really what started me on my journey in neurology. And then when I was 18 years old, I was actually diagnosed with kidney failure. Had my first kidney transplant at 28 years old. Um, did well for about 14 years or so, and then had a second kidney transplant. And one of the things that got me through those difficult time periods was the knowledge that I have about how the brain works. And so, yeah, I've taken that passion that I have for the brain, and I've used that to help people go through the challenges that they face in life.
That's an incredibly pure reason to get into this, and I can imagine even more rewarding. Your drive must be immense, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think when you have a personal reason to have a purpose now to help the world, that's incredibly impactful, right? And so things that have to do with the brain, whether it's neurology, neuroplasticity, or just using your brain to create the life that you want for yourself, that for me is like everything. It's the reason why I do the things that I do.
Great to hear, because a lot of what we cover on the FitMind app and YouTube channel and podcast is usually related to sort of the meditation stuff. And the topic of our conversation today is neuroplasticity. And I feel like we cover less of what you talk about. So it's just a real honor and privilege to be able to talk to you today. So I feel like a lot of us sort of scientifically interested, we hear the word neuroplasticity and perhaps we kind of think that we have a rough idea of what it is. But for our listeners, could you define neuroplasticity?
Sure. So neuroplasticity really refers to your ability to create new neurons and new connections. And it means that the brain is capable of adapting, learning, and healing because we are able to make new neurons and connections. And what's really powerful when it comes to neuroplasticity is that we're actually in control of how our brains evolve. And so the decisions that we make every single day, the actions that we take every single day, really determines if we're going to make new neurons or new connections, if we're going to have new ideas, if we're going to truly evolve into the people that we want to be.
You call it the brain's superpower. Why do you call it that?
Yeah, because for me, the fact that we are capable of evolving is incredibly powerful, right? And we're capable of evolving our entire lives. We don't have to stay static in any way. And if we're capable of evolving as individuals, that means that as a community, we're capable of evolving. As a society, we're capable of evolving. As a planet, we're capable of evolving. I don't think we've truly tapped in to our potential as individuals and as a society in general. There's so much better that can come out of who we are because we hold this incredibly powerful organs within our skull that allows us to create.
Is neuroplasticity, is it always a good thing? Is it generally in the positive direction? Because I feel like it's so associated with such positive change.
Well, it all depends on what it is that we are now learning, right? And so if you're learning positive things that move your life in a positive direction, then absolutely it's a positive thing. If it's moving society in a positive direction, then absolutely it's a positive thing. But oftentimes we take in information that's negative, right? And then we hardwire them into our brains because we're constantly repeating them or we're constantly hearing them over and over. And in some ways, they hold us back as individuals and as a community. And so that may not be a great thing when we see that happen.
I think right now we probably need it more than ever. There was obviously the common myth we used to hear, and I think I don't know how long ago this was sort of debunked, but it was as we got older, we would have more of a fixed brain, and I guess in some ways that might be true. Um, but yeah, what are the sort of common myths that you hear that even well-informed people believe about neuroplasticity?
Well, I think you're spot on. A lot of people think that we're born with these brains and we don't really evolve over time, or if we do evolve after a certain age, our brain stops developing. Um, I think a lot of people feel like our brains stop developing sometime in our 20s. And the reality is that our brains are always capable of making new neurons and new connections. Our brains are always capable of learning or adapting or even healing from brain injury as long as we are giving our brains what it needs. And sure, it's very true that we have certain critical periods in our brain's development, right? So a baby from 0 to 2, everything is new to that baby, right? So that baby is just constantly learning because everything is a brand new experience. They're like a clean slate when a baby comes out. And so, again, during those teenage years and early adult years, our brains are going through a lot of different changes. And that's another critical period. Even when a woman becomes pregnant, that's another critical period in a woman's life where the brain is changing, right? Because all of a sudden, the focus is not necessarily on the individual. The focus now becomes on being a parent to that child. A focus, the focus becomes making sure that that baby is going to survive. So your brain is changing as a result of that. And not only do we see that happen in mothers, right, where we talk about, oh, pregnancy brain, mommy brain, those things are real things, but we even see that happen with fathers. And so, yes, there are critical periods in people's lives where the brain is more primed to make new neurons and new connections. But as long as we're doing things throughout our entire life, we maintain that ability.
Yeah, I read that recently about fathers as well, that they also go through some like structural changes. And yeah, a lot of it, it's obvious in a woman, they're the primary caregiver, they give birth to the child. But it is interesting to see that, yeah, also dads go through that as well, which I guess is classic in hindsight, makes so much sense, but feels like quite an unusual hypothesis or perspective.
Yeah, I think, the reality is when we think about the primary function of the brain wants to make sure that you as an individual survives. But once you start having children, that shifts. Not only does the brain want to make sure that you survive, it wants to make sure that your children survive. Right? You've got to pass your genes on to the next generation. And so as a result, we do see these changes start to happen in the brain to make sure that our offspring survive as well.
Can that be can the mindset be passed down? Or is that always a learned behavior?
Well, it's funny because as a doctor, people are always coming to me and they're talking to me about, oh, this runs in my family. I've got diabetes because it runs in my family, right? Alzheimer's runs in my family, whatever it is. But what people don't realize is that the thoughts and the ideas that you have about your health also run in your family. That's what gets passed down. The thoughts and the ideas about who you are, what you're capable of, that's what gets passed down. Your relationship with food gets passed down. Your relationship with physical activity gets passed down, right? If you grow up in a family where everybody's eating really unhealthy, it's always fast food, it's always processed food, and that's what you take into adulthood, well, guess what? You're more likely to have some chronic illness. If you grow up seeing mothers and fathers who are not exercising, who are becoming obese, well, you're going to take those ideas down with you and you're not going to exercise. And so mindset is certainly something that is passed down. If you grow up in a family where education is important, where money seems to come easy, where it's all about success and having a powerful impact on this planet, well, that's going to get passed down to you also. And so the mindsets that we have, we certainly pass down to our children, whether we mean to or not.
In a way, it just it empowers us, because what's been passed to us is completely out of our control. But what is in our control is what we do with that, or how we move forward. And then the ripple effect of that, if we have kids in particular, or even just friends or whoever that might be, is massive. Yeah, I think we can't even probably begin to imagine the effect that might have. And it's just even more motivation to change these, yeah, lifestyle factors, or diet and mental habits and everything. It's really, yeah, empowering.
Yeah, one of the things that I talk to people about all the time is becoming the leader that your brain needs you to be, or taking charge of your brain. And that's actually the name of my online course, Taking Charge of Your Brain. And what it really refers to is that we get to be the architects of our thoughts, of our beliefs, of our habits, of the actions that we take. At some point in our lives, we have to stop blaming mommy and daddy, right? We have to stop blaming family. We have to recognize what is it that works for us. And then we have to consciously decide to make some changes. And we get to take charge of our brain so that way we can create the health that we want for ourselves, the businesses that we want for ourselves, the relationships that we want for ourselves, and the life that we want for ourselves. And when you understand how your brain works, that's when you're truly able to create the emotional, physical, and mental health that you want, because now you understand the power of your thinking. You understand the power of your creativity and imagination. You understand the power of your desire. You understand how powerful the actions that you take every moment of every day, the impact that that's going to have on your life. And so taking charge of your brain is incredibly important to move away from the things that were passed down to you that maybe don't work for you. And then you now start to implement the things that do work for you, that are going to allow you to create the life that you want for yourself.
What sort of lifestyle changes do you recommend? I feel it's quite unusual to hear, yeah, doctors talking so eloquently about, yeah, the mindset or the way we think. What lifestyle changes do you recommend for individuals, like aiming to enhance their brain health? Yeah, are there any specific exercises or dietary habits that you recommend?
So these are things that people can do every single day. And I'll start it off with a story. I had a patient that I was taking care of who had horrible epilepsy, horrible epilepsy. So she was a woman in her mid 30s. Let's say her name was Janet. That wasn't her real name, but we'll say her name was Janet. She had had seizures from the time that she was a child. She had undergone 2 different brain surgeries to try to take out the part of the brain that was seizing. Both those surgeries failed. She was on seven different anti-seizure medications when she was seeing me, and she was still seizing all the time. I finally got her to a place where she was seizure free for 6 months. And the only thing that I did was take soda out of her diet. Took soda out of her diet, she became seizure free. She comes back into the emergency room 6 months later, and she had had a couple of seizures. And so I say, Janet, what's going on? And Janet says to me, you will never take soda out of my diet again. And she had 2 1-liter bottles of Pepsi at the bedside, right? So yes, there are changes that we can make, certainly in the foods that we take in, that have an impact on our overall health and our brain health. And sometimes it doesn't even need to be big changes. You can start off with small changes that will allow you to create the brain health that you want for yourself. So the foods that we eat or don't eat are incredibly important. Did you know that fasting, so fasting is incredibly powerful for our health, right? Our bodies are a machine. And every time we're eating, it takes a lot of work for the body to break down food, especially the harsher foods, the harder foods, the processed foods. And so as a byproduct of all that work, toxins build up in the gut. Inflammation happens in the gut. But those toxins and inflammation don't just stay in the gut, they travel everywhere, including to our brain. And that's why Janet was having seizures when she was taking in something like soda that's very harsh on the body. And so if we fast, we give our brains and bodies a break. We give the machinery a break to restore itself, right? To not have to work. We allow our brains and bodies to now clear out the toxins that have built up throughout the day. And one of the things that we see is when we take in less calories, we see increases in brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Now, this is the chemical that is most associated with neuroplasticity. This is the chemical that's most associated with our brains making new neurons and new connections. And so fasting is an incredibly important component when it comes to making sure that our brains are healthy. I tell people all the time, you cannot have a powerful mind without a healthy brain. And so certainly having a healthy brain, doing things like eating right, is really important. Here in the United States, one of the things that we see over the last 30, 40 years, the diseases that have gone up the most are sedentary lifestyle, type 2 diabetes, which is a lifestyle disease, and it's due to the kind of foods that we're eating, and Alzheimer's disease, which is a kind of dementia. And a lot of neuroscientists and neurologists will tell you that Alzheimer's disease is really type 3 diabetes. That's how close of an association that there is. And so we have to be incredibly mindful of the foods that we're taking in, because not only is it impacting our health today, but it's impacting our brain health 10, 20, 30 years from now, right? So certainly the foods that we're eating, the things that we're drinking are incredibly important. About a year ago, went very viral online because I told people you need to stop drinking alcohol. Alcohol is associated with over 200 different diseases, right? Here in the United States, the Surgeon General just came out and said alcohol is associated with at least 7 different types of cancers: breast cancer, colon cancer, esophageal cancer. But not only that, alcohol is one of the leading causes of dementia. Alcohol causes strokes. Alcohol causes heart disease, where here in the US, for decades, they've been brainwashing us into thinking that a glass of wine per day is good for your heart. The reality is there's no drop of alcohol that is good for any aspect of your health, because alcohol is a toxin and certainly toxic to the brain. What people don't realize is that when you are getting tipsy and getting drunk, it's because of the dysfunction that alcohol is causing to the neurons in the brain. And in fact, when people are getting tipsy, we do see that their brains start to shrink. Their brains become very dehydrated. Now, if somebody, goes out and drinks once and then they don't do it again, your brain will plump back up. But people who are social drinkers, whatever that means for them, or they drink in moderation, whatever that means for them, over time, your brain starts to shrink. So the foods that we put in, the drinks that we take in, are incredibly important for brain health. The other thing I would say is exercise. We don't just exercise to look good physically. Exercise is one of the most powerful promoters of neuroplasticity. So exercise causes the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which again causes the brain to make new neurons and new connections. And studies have shown, how when you're in school, like you'll cram till the last minute for that test, you're trying to get in all that information. Studies show that you are much better off going for a run an hour before you take a test than you are cramming. You'll retain more by going for that run, and you'll do better on that test. And in fact, people who are starting to develop early signs and symptoms of dementia, so maybe they have like a mild cognitive impairment, if those people start to just walk 40, 45 minutes every single day, they can start to reverse some of those signs and symptoms of dementia. So exercise is incredibly powerful for the brain. So far we've talked about what eating healthy, exercise, getting enough sleep is important. We need to be getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep every single night. Sleep is made for the brain. That's when your brain clears out the toxins that have been built up throughout the day. That's when the brain takes what you've learned throughout the day and turns it into memory. That's when neuroplasticity really sort of kicks into effect, is when you're in the deeper stages of sleep. People who don't get enough sleep in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s are more likely to develop dementia in their 60s and 70s. So sleep is made for the brain, and you need to be getting a good night's sleep in order to have really good brain health. Another thing I would say is be very mindful about the people that you spend time with. Right? We have what's called in our brains called mirror neurons, a specialized group of neurons. And so if I scratch my nose, you're more likely to scratch your nose, right? Because of mirror neurons. And it's thought that this elicits some kind of empathy. But what we find is that people's neurons start operating at the same frequency as the people that they spend most of their time with. So you start to think like them and you start to act like them. And so if you surround yourself with really good people, really successful people, you're going to become a really good, successful person. If you surround yourself with people that are not so good and maybe not so successful, well, you're going to become that also. Right? So those are some of the things that we can do to make sure that our brains stay healthy. And certainly minimizing or finding healthy ways to deal with chronic stress is another one, because chronic stress kills neurons, especially in the parts of the brain responsible for making new memories.
It's so interesting that you talked about the fasting initially. Um, yeah, I started fasting again yesterday, actually. My diet has been, I think, taking a turn for the worse more recently, like partly stress related. So I feel like everything you just said is just so heavily connected. And then yesterday I did OMAD. I just ate dinner, and by sort of 11, I could just feel like the stress lowering. I think inflammation in my brain. I don't know if you could technically feel that, but how it feels is inflammation in the body is coming down.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I'm more resilient. I feel calmer. And yeah, I can feel immediately the shift to ketosis. I wouldn't recommend necessarily OMAD. I think, yeah, you would know more than me whether that might be a good approach for certain people. But yeah, at certain times in my life, that does feel like the best approach, particularly if I've had a bit of a bad run with food. And it's interesting, actually, a lot of monks, they do OMAD. And I wonder if there was some maybe insight into whether that was the most neuroplastic state to be in, and that led to potentially insights into like the workings of the mind or the thought patterns or um yeah, however that might play out. So is there a certain fasting protocol that you would recommend, or is that just dependent on the person that would come to you? Or yeah, how do you decide or review on that?
So it's really trying to do it on the individual basis, right? Some people, you say, listen, if you do a 7-day fast and you're drinking water during this fast, don't dehydrate yourself because that's a problem. That's going to be problematic. Some people are able to do that. And people who are able to do that will tell you they have very spiritual moments during these fasts, right? That's where they're flooded with new ideas. That's where they feel most connected to God or to infinite intelligence or to the universe, right? That's when your body really starts to go a tremendous amount of healing. And a lot of people will tell you that diseases are cured in fasting, not necessarily with the pills that we prescribe, but in giving your body a break from eating all that food and allowing it now to start to do what the body is really good at and getting rid of dead and diseased cells. And so it's a really individualized thing. Some people I'm just like, listen, you need to not eat after midnight. like, like no more waking up in the middle of the night and snacking on food. Do not do that, right? I try to tell most people your last meal for the night should be at least 3 hours before you're going to go to bed. Okay. So that way, just the normal digestive process doesn't interfere with your sleeping and you can get a good night's sleep. And then when you breakfast is really break the fast. You should not break the fast with pancakes and waffles and all these big carbohydrate meals. Right? Get some water in you. Get maybe started off with a little bit of fruit, or if you can, don't eat your first meal until noon or 1 o'clock. Give your body that extra time. Right? Here we're sold on this idea that we've got to eat 3 meals a day. Well, our bodies weren't designed to eat 3 meals a day. And so, maybe snacking on some fruit, having one healthy meal for dinner, for a lot of people, that's going to be enough. And so it's really about trying to tailor it, trying to individualize it based on the person's needs and what they may or may not be capable of doing.
Yeah, I think that's a better approach because we're all looking for the one size fits all. I can just apply this to my life.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think a lot of it, you can test upon yourself as well, or yeah, you can go see someone like you, or there's some intuition, but yeah, we see a lot of, we should apply this to everybody. And it becomes in some ways overwhelming because we're not quite sure what to do or how to move from that position. In terms of actual foods, like we hear a lot the Mediterranean diet, or yeah, pescatarian diet, or one
Okay.
of the many others. Is there any that you feel are most useful for longevity and health, physical and mental?
Sure. So the berries are incredibly powerful. So blueberries, which is like nature's candy, it's a powerful antioxidant. But certainly blueberries, cranberries, strawberries are really great. For me, every morning I make like a smoothie that includes berries, that includes kale, that includes some mango chunks. And that for me is really, really great. Certainly, some of the fatty fishes like salmon are great for brain health. Um, and so there are things getting the omega-3 fatty acids in you, whether you want to supplement that with a over-the-counter sort of vitamin, that can be really great. One of the things I tell people all the time, don't forget how powerful the sun is. The sun is our greatest source of nourishment. And here in the States, we're in the middle of winter. So we have a good 6 months where we just don't get enough sun. But what we see is that everybody across the board is vitamin D deficient. And vitamin D is incredibly important for brain health. If you're low in vitamin D levels, you're more likely to have mental health issues like depression. If you're low in vitamin D levels, you're more likely to develop dementia. And so finding ways to get out in that sun during the safe times during the day where maybe the sun's not too strong. So I like to go in the sun first thing in the morning and get that first morning sunlight. But that's also incredibly powerful when we talk about our nourishment.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a little bit obsessed with the sun. I'm from England originally, where we had strong lack of sun, and then now in Australia. But apparently here also most people are vitamin D deficient, and it's because, I mean, there's also the other side of that. Yeah, there was previously a hole in the ozone here, which I believe now has at least mostly healed itself, and then through that there was skin cancer issues, but also that would make people in some ways like not go in the sun, and then that made you think of Australia, you think of the sun, so it's kind of ironic that there might be a lot of people here that were vitamin D deficient.
Yeah. Well, we see it all over. I mean, certainly people that have darker complexions tend to be more vitamin D deficient because their skin has a lot more trouble absorbing the vitamin D. And so the reality is none of us are spending enough time in the sun. And certainly, I think the safest time to spend in the sun is first thing in the morning when the sun is not as intense. Trying to get maybe 2 to 3 hours of sunlight, I think would be incredibly powerful for most people.
So outside of diet, what sort of lifestyle or habitual changes or daily routines would you recommend to help promote a healthy brain and potentially increase neuroplasticity?
So one of the things that I do besides, daily exercise, learning is incredibly important. So I was speaking at a school a week ago, and I was telling them that, the other name for graduation here is commencement, which in French, the word commence means the beginning. And so when you end whatever formal level of education that's going to be your last, that is really the beginning of your informal education. You have to continue to learn every single day. That's incredibly powerful for brain health. Learning is another powerful promoter of neuroplasticity. And so I intentionally try to learn, but I also am very mindful of the information that I'm taking in, right? So I don't necessarily listen to the news because the news is often incredibly negative, and that will influence my mindset, right? That will make new neurons and new connections, but maybe not the new neurons and connections that I want to make, right? We talked about whether or not neuroplasticity can be negative. Well, if I'm taking in negative information, well, that's not going to have a really good impact on the kind of person that I want to be and how I relate to the world, right? I'm very mindful about the books that I'm reading. I'm very mindful if I'm scrolling on social media, what it is that's going to be on my page. I'm also very mindful about the people that I spend time with. I don't want to spend time with people who are negative. So I told you, to start that I had kidney failure and underwent 2 kidney transplants. Well, part of that story too is that I did dialysis for a period of time. And while I was doing dialysis, I didn't spend time with other people doing dialysis. I didn't want to hear their woe is me sort of story, right? I wanted more positive and powerful messages. And so I think being mindful of who we're spending time with, the information that we're taking in, also impacts how our brains start to develop.
What is dialysis for those that don't know?
So dialysis, so when the function of your kidney is to filter out the toxins within your bloodstream. When your kidneys aren't working well, you get toxins that build up. And so dialysis is they hook you up to a machine that then filters the blood for you. So it cycles the blood out of your body, filters it out, and brings it back into your body.
I mean, it's incredible how many influences you've had that seem to have moved you towards the path you're on. And yeah, you're an incredible speaker. So thank you so much for sharing. If you were to say the top three, because a lot of what people will be thinking is I'm so busy,
Yeah.
it's difficult to change. What do I do? If I could just focus on one or two,
Yeah.
um, if we went from a sort of general, how you see the general population come in to you.
Yeah. Exercise. And exercise doesn't mean going to the gym if you don't like to do that. Exercise can mean if you're somebody who likes playing tennis, find a way to play tennis 2 or 3 times a week, right? If you're somebody who loves dancing, find a way to dance 3 or 4 times a week. Exercise is doing the things that get your body moving, get your heart rate up, maybe gets you sweating a bit, right? And exercise is probably the best antidepressant, anti-anxiety treatment that we have. And so it's not only important for your physical health, your brain health, but also your mental health. So find ways to exercise, to incorporate exercise into your routine at least 3 to 4 times per week. Find healthy ways to eat. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a big overhaul. You don't have to, if you're eating whatever standard diet is in your community, you don't all of a sudden have to switch to a ketogenic diet or a Mediterranean diet, right? But start making conscious decisions about the small things that you can do every single day. So you're somebody who drinks 3 cans of soda per day, well, maybe take that down to 2 cans of soda per day. If you're somebody who doesn't ever eat fruits or vegetables, well, maybe start incorporating an apple and maybe a small salad as part of your dinner, right? So find just small changes that you can make, small healthier changes that you can make in terms of the foods that we eat. Third thing I would say is just getting enough sleep. And we all have to prepare our bodies and our brains to sleep at night, right? So, and the way that we do that, we talk about it as improving your sleep hygiene. I tell people all the time, get all the electronics out of the bedroom. Only two things happen in the bedroom: sleep and sex. Get the TV out, the phones out, the laptops out, all the electronics out, because that's going to interfere with your ability to get into the deeper stages of sleep. We talked a little bit about your last meal should be at least 3 hours before you're going to go to bed, because you don't want the digestive process to interfere with your sleeping. I would tell people your last dose of caffeine should be at least 8 hours before you're going to go to sleep. So the coffees and the teas, if you're going to go to sleep at 10, well, maybe your last dose should be at around 2 p.m. One of the things that we see is, look, as the sun starts to go down, your body starts to secrete melatonin to signal to your brain and body it's time for bed, right? But what do we have? We have all the artificial lights on in our homes, which can interfere with our brain secreting melatonin. And so as the sun starts to go down, you should also start to decrease the lighting in your own home. And so those are just some of the things that you can do to prepare your brain and body to sleep at night.
Yeah, it's so funny. The power went out. We had a big storm through last week, and the power went out. So when it went dark, the whole house was fully dark. And we're usually quite strict about bringing the lights down anyway. But it's just funny how you just get tired immediately once it's actually dark.
Yeah. And people, I think, underestimate the fact that we have our own internal clock in our brains that responds to the environment. And so now if you're going against your own nature, that's going to make it really difficult to get a good night's sleep.
And I love the focus you put on exercise being, yeah, just if you like dancing, dance. If you like tennis, play tennis. And that's kind of the approach that we take to the mental fitness and meditations that we do as well. I think if you enjoy it, you're much more likely to go back. So, yeah, the common thing to do, particularly with diet, comes to mind is, we'll go into something quite strict and then bounce back and then just completely fall off the wagon. And then there's just this constant, version of yo-yo dieting.
Yeah, it's just the small changes can have such a powerful impact, just like it did for my patient Janet. Right? I didn't overhaul her entire diet to help with her seizures. I just made one small change. Now, she couldn't stick with that small change, even though it had this significant impact for her. But most of us, it's one small change, even when it comes to preparing our bodies for sleep at night. So I listed maybe 4 or 5 things. But usually it takes 1 or 2 things, 1 or 2 changes that people make, and that will have a significant impact on their ability to get a good night's sleep. It's small changes that really change our overall health and well-being.
You mentioned strokes and dementia. How does neuroplasticity play a role in preventing or managing those neurological disorders?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So every neurological disorder, occurs because of some kind of breakdown in connection between neurons, right? So our brains contain anywhere from 60 to 100 billion neurons. And what makes neurons so incredibly special and important is that they are specifically built for connection, to be able to connect and communicate with each other. And so I tell people often that we need to start acting more like neurons. Every neurological disorder occurs because of a breakdown in communication and connection. And we see that with people too, right? Like when couples split, it's usually because there's a breakdown in communication and connection. When families aren't getting along, there's a breakdown in communication and connection. When countries go to war, there's a breakdown in communication and connection. Every neurological disorder is a breakdown in communication and connection. When somebody has a stroke, it's because there's a clot that blocks the flow of blood to a particular part of the brain that now you're not getting enough blood flow and nutrients to that part and causes that particular area to die, right? So there's now a breakdown in communication and connection in that particular area. And as a result, people can have weakness, difficulty speaking, dizziness, numbness. Well, when somebody has something like dementia, it's because there's widespread loss all over, widespread loss of neurons, right? So you've got this widespread breakdown in communication and connection. Oftentimes what we see is when somebody's had a stroke, let's say if they're paralyzed on their left side, well, after a while, they start not even trying to use that left side, basically communicating to their brain, oh, we don't need that part of the body anymore, so we don't even need to try to make new neurons and new connections in that area. And what you need to do is still try to exercise the part that is not working the way that you want it to be working. And it doesn't mean that you're going to get the function back 100%, but the brain can continue to heal itself months and years after an initial injury, right? And you can see the brain start to rewire and make new neurons around the injured area. And so even people with dementia, like I mentioned before, that especially in the early stages, if they're just walking 45 minutes a day, that their symptoms will start to improve because now you're making new neurons and new connections. You have to give your brain what it needs. It needs to be stimulated. It needs for you to exercise. It needs for you to continue to learn. It needs for you to take away the things that are hurting the brain in order for it to heal.
Yeah, it's so interesting. My nan actually, she had dementia, and she just by chance used to fast. Like she just, I think she did it for like aesthetic reasons, and then it became habitual. And she was in perfect mental health until she was probably mid 70s. But her diet, when she did eat, was quite poor, quite sugar rich, and yeah, it just wasn't not many vegetables in there, and probably no fruit actually. So yeah, it's interesting. If you do see the early onset, what would you recommend at that point?
I would certainly recommend exercise.
Mhm.
I would recommend learning something new, like a new instrument, a new language. I would recommend that person finding a purpose every single day. We all need a reason to get up every morning. I had a patient once, her family brought her to see me, and she was from Eastern Europe, and she had come 6 months before to the United States. And so they said to me, look, she was great. She was doing well, up until 6 months ago. And in the last 6 months, things have been declining. And I said, well, tell me about her life, a year ago, before she came to the US. And they're like, well, she had her friends, she had her garden, she had all these things that she used to do. She was doing great. And we brought her here so she can take care of the kids. And, since then, she's kind of been declining cognitively. And I said, well, so you took her out of her environment where she had a purpose, a reason for being, where she had like this community around her. And you brought her here to take care of your kids. I'm sure she loves her grandchildren, right? But she no longer is doing what she wants to be doing every single day. And they said, well, we try to take her out a couple times a week. I was like, most people take their dogs out twice a day. Like, you're only taking her out twice a week, right? And the reality is that even when we are depressed, lack purpose, that can often mask itself as dementia. And in fact, we call that pseudo-dementia, right? So I think making sure that we all have a reason to get up every single day, whatever that is for an individual, is also incredibly important.
So for in terms of like mental exercises, is there any practices that you might recommend there that might help?
Yeah. So certainly reading. I'm a big reader. I think reading is incredibly important for brain health. You know, when you think about a book, right? The knowledge in a book somebody took years to accumulate, and you get to now digest that knowledge within a matter of hours. Allows your brain to make new neurons and new connections. I'm a big fan of the game of chess. I'm not that good at it, but I'm a big fan of the game of chess, right? Playing chess, having to try to anticipate what it is that your opponent wants to do, trying to plan out what you want to do for your next maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 moves, I think is also incredibly powerful for the brain. Learning new things like a new language is incredibly powerful. Traveling to new lands, right, is also incredibly powerful. Having conversations with people who are different from you is really powerful. You don't have to adopt their ideas, but listening to their ideas and their reasoning allows your brain to make new neurons and new connections. So those are the mental things that people can do every day. Read, learn something new, have a conversation with somebody who is not like you, didn't grow up like you, doesn't have the same beliefs you have, right? But instead, in this world, it's like people don't want to listen to each other's ideas, you know? But that is so good for the brain.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read recently that reading outside, I think it was from Stephen Kotler, who does a lot of research on flow states, and he recommends reading at least a portion of your daily reading outside of what you would normally be interested in. And the reason he recommends that is that basically you create new, say your connections are just the 5 over here, then now you have, say, 5 more over here, and then being able to connect those ideas then increases the likelihood of flow states. I wonder if flow has any correlation with neuroplasticity. Yeah, I might just be thinking out loud here, but yeah, I imagine it probably does put you in a state where you potentially are ready to change.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I would say that. So when you're in a state of flow, things are just kind of coming so easy, so naturally, you're not even thinking about it, right? It is your brain working as efficiently as possible. Your brain is lazy by nature, right? Your brain it takes a lot of energy to learn something new. But when you learn something and you constantly practice it, then you don't really have to think about it, right? Like, so, yeah, I was sharing with you that I grew up playing and competing in tennis. I'm sure the first time I tried to hit a forehand, it's like I have to think about how to hold the racket. I have to think about the ball coming to me. I have to think about where my feet are supposed to be, right? I have to think about where I want to try to hit it. That's a lot for the brain to coordinate. But the more that I practice it, I don't have to think about any of that. The ball comes to my right side, I hit a forehand. That's like flow state. It's so efficient, I don't even have to think about it, right? It's been so hardwired in. It's what people refer to as muscle memory. It's not that your muscle remembers it, it's that your brain has gotten so good at it that it takes no work. It takes no conscious effort. And that's what flow state is. It's taking no conscious effort. It's just happening easily and naturally. Your brain is expending very, very little energy. A few years ago, I was like, I want to learn how to play the piano. Never did a musical instrument in my entire life. So I'm sitting there with the instructor, and she's like, okay, here's where your left hand goes, here's where your right hand goes, here's the sheet music, this is what this symbol means, that symbol means, right? So I'm trying to coordinate my left hand and my right hand, and I'm trying to read the sheet music, which I've never done. And I'm like, oh my God, my brain hurts. But as a neurologist, I'm like, but the brain has no pain receptors. This is why we can operate on somebody's brain while they're awake. There's no pain receptors to the brain. So what is it that I'm feeling? And then it dawned on me. What I'm feeling is neuroplasticity. This is the first thing that I've done in a very long time, so different from everything that I've ever done. So different, right? It's not related to neurology. It's not related to sports or to tennis or basketball or anything like that. It's not you know, related to the readings that I do. This is completely new. And this was my brain making new neurons and new connections. And it's important for us to do things completely different from things that we've done in the past and things that we're good at. I had a patient once, he was a memory expert, and I had attended one of his memory lectures. And he was so deep in the weeds of his jargon that I was like, I have no idea what this guy's talking about. And he's talking about memory, and I'm a neurologist, right? I was like, this guy cannot explain this to, a neurologist, let alone like a fifth grader, you know? A couple of years later, he comes to see me in the office, and he comes to see me for memory problems. This memory expert, right? He had spent 40 years of his life solely focused on his research in memory. So much so in detail that he couldn't even explain the bigger picture to other specialists in the room so that they could understand it. He had never learned anything new. And so now he was having memory problems. And we see this happen with people all the time who spend 30, 40, 50 years in the same industry, doing the same thing every day. They're superstars in their jobs. But the moment that they retire, you start to see, oh, wait, this person has some cognitive issues. They're starting to develop dementia because they never learned anything new. And so it's important that we learn new things outside of our specialties.
It's interesting. I can feel with the learning new things as I get older, because I also started learning piano as an adult. And it's interesting to notice those. I don't know if you have it, but there's like a higher level of resistance to being bad. And then I, I actually think it might not necessarily be that it's more difficult to learn as an adult. It's just like you think it's more difficult.
Yeah,
And it's partly just your mind is so full and you assume that you shouldn't be bad more quickly. At least this is how it's perceived by me.
yeah,
So it's more difficult. Like as a kid, you're just so, like you said, you're so empty, and I'm sure there is actual like physiology that makes you more neuroplastic. But partly, I think it's just your brain is so. There's just these assumptions about how you should be at something, and the fear of failure, at least for me, is just so much higher.
yeah. And look, I think, and that's what kids don't have. They don't make these assumptions of whether they should be good or not. They don't have the fear of failure that us adults have, right? Like you get to a certain point in life, you're like, okay, I graduated college, I went to university, I did this, I did that, I'm successful here. Like I should not be bad at anything. But being bad at something is actually really great for us. That's what gives us the most opportunity to blossom, right? So we should search out things and try to do things that we're not good at, that we're going to be bad at. And we should go into it with an open mind and with this idea that we're just going to have a great time. We're going to have fun. One of the things I tell people all the time is emotions are the secret ingredient to learning anything new. If you tie an emotion to something, you're going to remember it. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be some complicated math equation. It could be, how to stand when you're going to hit that tennis ball. You apply emotion to it, you will learn it. Most people, instead of using their emotions to get what they want, they let their emotions use them, and they end up miserable. But if you use your emotions properly, that's the secret ingredient.
That's an amazing perspective. And actually, I'm obsessed with this study. There's a study on meditation where they took a bunch of beginners and then they taught them different types of meditation. And they found the one that changed the default mode network. It was a study by Richard Davies. And they found that the study that changed the default mode network the quickest was metta, or loving kindness. And his conclusion was it's though the brain is built for love.
Mhm.
And I think we all know that love is the most powerful emotion. So it's really interesting if you do tie love to or some form of enjoyment or fun or And that also lowers that resistance I was talking about, and the assumption that I should be good. You become humbled and then more open to learning or failing, or I mean, it's not really failure, is it? That's just another perspective shift. It's just how it is. But you could also look at it as an opportunity to learn, or you could reframe it in many different ways.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you've mentioned resistance now 2 or 3 times. And the saying is that what you resist persist.
Mm.
And so if you're resisting this thing where you feel like, no, I need to be better than this. Well, you're just going to continue to get that thing, and you're not going to now take the risk that you want to take because you're always going to have this fear. And instead, we need to be very welcoming. We need to be welcoming and open to new opportunities, new challenges, strategic risk. And I think you're spot on when you talk about the impact that love has. Love lights up different aspects of the brain. Can you imagine if our approach to the problems that we see in this world was love? Government approaches were love, individual approaches were love, society's approach was love. How much better things would be, how much healthier our brains would be, how much happier we would be. All of our cortisol levels would just drop. We'd be so less stressed. Love is powerful.
It really is. And that's actually a great point, and something that I did want to bring up. Chronic stress is obviously an extremely common issue among almost everybody, at least I know in my close vicinity. So what impact does that have on the brain? And how could neuroplasticity start to maybe mitigate those effects?
Yeah. So we're all built for short-term stress, right? And it used to be early humans, short-term stress was, oh, there's this predator chasing us, we need to get away. But once we got away, our stress levels would come down, right? And even in the animal kingdom, you see this. Like if you watch any of the nature shows, I remember watching one where a cheetah and her cubs saw, maybe it was like a lion or something in the distance. And the cheetah got down really low, got its muscles got very, very tight, right? And then once it saw that the lion went off, it stood up and it shook itself off, and it was now relaxed again. It literally shook the stress off, right? Short-term stress. Now, for human beings, our stress is bills, where our next meal is coming from, whatever is going on in the world. These are everyday things. We never have time to shake it off. And so what we see that happens with stress in the brain, let's say a lion walks into the room. That's a very stressful event for anybody, right? Your brain wants to focus on that threat. It's going to be hyper focused on where the lion is, the posture of the lion, what can you grab to maybe defend yourself, your quickest exit to be safe. Let's say you make it out of there and you're completely fine. And 2 weeks from now, you're telling the story and somebody says to you, Josh, what were you doing in that room to begin with? You might be like, you know what? I don't even remember. Because why you were in that room was not important. You were not making new memories during that period of time because that was not important to the brain. So people who are chronically under stress have memory problems because it's killing neurons in the part of the brain that's responsible for making memory. People who are chronically under stress, their amygdala, the part of the brain that's really responsible for our emotions, but also especially responsible for our negative emotions like fear, the amygdala is in hyperdrive. So we get cortisol and adrenaline that's just being pumped out in high levels. Well, you know what that does? That weakens our immune system, cortisol, over a long period of time. It predisposes us to gaining weight, especially putting on belly fat. It increases our risk of diabetes. It increases our risk of cancer. It is horrible for us. The adrenaline that's causing our hearts to beat, well, that's having a negative impact on our heart. So chronic stress is killing every aspect of our bodies, including our brains.
Yeah, and I feel like anybody that's been through any form of chronic stress, you can really feel it and I think it's probably, again, maybe obvious in hindsight, but a lot of these, as we get older, we get more stressed. So a lot of the things we associate with aging are actually probably partially, or even maybe even more than we think, related to just an increase in general stress levels. Is there any like practices that you would encourage to manage stress,
Yeah.
or any daily habits or anything like that?
First, I think the most important thing is how we think about what is going on in our lives. Because stuff happens to all of us, right? I mentioned that I'm a two-time kidney transplant recipient. Right? During those times, I had a decision to make. Was I going to focus on the negativity, or was I going to focus on what I wanted my life to look like and the good things happening in my life? And so when we're under stress, which we all go through, do we focus on the stressor, or do we focus on the good things that are happening? Because the reality is, there are good things happening every single day. You woke up this morning, Josh. That's a great thing. There are people that went to bed last night that didn't wake up, right? Maybe the good thing is that, hey, I get to do a podcast today. Whatever that is, there's something good happening. And so I think our mindset around what is going on in our lives is incredibly important. Then I think that we do need to adopt healthy habits to minimize our level of stress. So whether exercise is a big one, right? I told you about the cheetah that just shook everything off, right? Getting our muscles moving, getting our bodies moving, whether it's running, swimming, playing tennis, playing basketball, going to the gym, pumping weights, whatever that is for you, do it, because that's going to be a big stress relief. So I think that mindset, getting our bodies moving, incredibly important to help mitigate stress. Getting a good night's sleep helps to mitigate stress. Laughing is incredibly good for our health and to mitigate the stress response. There's tons of anecdotal stories about people who were diagnosed with cancer or some other medical illness. And instead of treatment, they went and they watched comedy for like the next 3, 4 weeks. And whatever condition that they were dealing with got better, right? Because now you're combating the negative impact that stress has. You're decreasing your cortisol levels. And so even in tough moments, if you just put a smile on your face, that's going to have a significant impact on the stress that you're feeling. Do you know what what neuroscience tells us is the difference between the #1 tennis player in the world and the number 25 tennis player in the world? It's not their strokes, right? They all can hit forehands, backhands. They all serve really well. In fact, somebody who's ranked 100 might have a bigger serve than somebody that's ranked #1. But it's their response in the moment after a point, especially a point that they've lost. Are they going to be like, "Oh my God, I suck. Like this sucks. I hate this"? Or are they going to be like, "You know what? I love this sport. I love the sport. I love the challenge." You know? That is the difference. The mindset in the first few seconds after a point.
Yes, I love the perspective of how could I have done this better? Because, yeah, again, just referring to the learning piano as an adult, I think the initial reaction might be, I'm not good at this, or something like this. But as you said, as a child, they just continue. They just keep continuing. There's no reference for being bad at anything because, like,
No.
they know it's just things happening. It's just as it is, just
And
learning.
moments they have fun with it, right? Like they'll start banging on the piano, even though the teacher's like, "Don't do that," right? They're just doing all types of, and they're just having fun with it. And that is key. I feel like as adults, we lose a couple of things that are really powerful. We lose our imagination, which is one of the most powerful cognitive faculties that we have. And then we lose our ability to have fun without any external substances or anything external, right? That's contributing to that.
In terms of like advancements in neuroscience or the future of brain health,
Yeah.
neurology, is there anything that you're most excited about?
Yeah, I think, what I'm most excited about is the fact that we are recognizing that the most powerful computer that we have at our disposal lies within our skull, and that we need to start treating it as this magnificent organ that we have. Now, there's a lot of talk like, Elon Musk and his Neuralink and implanting devices into your head. I'm like, don't ever let anybody implant a device in your head unless you are having some kind of neurological disorder that requires it for your life to get better. Otherwise, don't let people do that. But certainly, this idea that with our thoughts are incredibly powerful, our mindsets are incredibly powerful, and we get to create the lives that we truly want for ourselves. We get to live the life that we want once we realize how to become the leaders that our brains need to be, once we realize that it's important to take charge of our brain every single day.
It just feels like a lot of these habits, all of them seem to lead to happiness. So you have the neuroplastic changes, and then on top of that, probably like lower inflammation, you're laughing more, you're enjoying life more, you're learning,
Mhm.
you're being more social. It's like, yeah, it's amazing that they're all in other ways are just they're just like good habits across the board, really. And it seems like there is really little downside to a lot of what you're encouraging here.
Yeah, no side effects. And you know what? Happiness is a skill. Happiness is a skill that we need to practice every single day, just like a forehand is a skill, right? Reading is a skill. We have to practice being happy every day, even in the tough moments in life. Finding that little nugget that brings us joy during those challenges.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And as we start to wrap up, we'll do like a quick rapid fire Q&A. So, coffee or tea for brain health?
Tea.
And what's your favorite brain healthy snack?
Oh, blueberries.
Neuroplasticity in one word.
Oh, healing.
Oh, amazing. So a lot of people are probably now wondering, how do they find out more about you and what the work that you're doing? Yeah, where do they go to find you?
So they can go to my website, www.inlebrainfitinstitute.com. They can find me on social media. My Instagram handle is philippe.md. They can find me on LinkedIn at Dr. Philippe Douyon. I'm on Facebook, also on TikTok, while it still stands here in the United States, which I don't know how much longer it'll be here. But yeah, they can find me on all the social media platforms. And they can also email me at philippedouyon@gmail.com.
And what about your book? Where would we find that?
So I've got my book, Neuroplasticity, Your Brain's Superpower, which they can find either on my website or they can go to Amazon.com. I've got a children's illustrated series called Neuri the Neuron to teach children about their brain. And I have a couple of ebooks, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, as well as 7 things you should be doing to minimize your risk of dementia.
And we'll put all the links in the description below. Thank you so much. Like, I think it would be such a privilege for anyone to have you as a doctor, and I think what you're doing is honestly, legitimately incredible. And it was an amazing conversation. So yeah, thank you so much from me and the FitMind team and the audience as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I listened to some of your other episodes, and they were so good. I was like, oh man, I can't wait to come on this.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Dr. Philippe. Yeah,
thank
it's
you.
good to see you.
You too.
Again, thank you so much for listening to the episode. We really hope you enjoyed it. I just wanted to take a quick moment to say that we recently released a 30 days of meditation, science, and bliss course. You can find that here on YouTube or over at the app. We do find that the app offers a much better experience, and then you get daily reminders and you can really track your mental fitness. So highly recommend checking that out.